Shooting a deer was the farthest thing from my mind that morning. We knew the woods were going to be loud and noisy, but I said, I'm going to go for a good walk. And so I did. I told Gary I'm going to be here all day. And Gary said, well, he said, um, I don't know if I'm going to stay here all day or not. I might just do a little scouting, see what's going on. I might drive I might go somewhere else. But he said, I'll be back before 3 o'clock. I'll be back before 3 o'clock. I said, okay, I'll be fine. Well,
why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
That'd be a good place to start. I'm a pretty plain guy. I will say this. I've always enjoyed my deer hunting tremendously. And I don't feel, now I've had some success at it. I've worked hard at it, but deer hunting for me has always been recreational. And I've always considered myself a recreational deer hunter, okay? I can name some people off that are really I would consider them really good deer hunters. I'm not one of them. I'll tell you that right now. But I don't think there's anybody that enjoys it any more than I do. I love, and part of it is being in the woods, the Northwoods. And I've been out west in the Midwest, and I've been into Canada, which is the Northwoods. But for me, I take a lot of enjoyment out of the hunt, just being in the woods. There's a lot of times I'm in the woods, I'm not even concentrating on hunting. I'm just enjoying the timber and the area that I'm in. And I've always hunted as remote a region as I can find. When I was a kid, my uncle used to come with me, and I used to go with him, and we'd park somewhere down in southern or middle part of Vermont in the Green Mountains, and I'd find the biggest mountain, and I had to be to the top of it. And they used to get after me. Well, why do you go all the way up there? There's just as many deer down here. Well, Uncle, I said, I like the remoteness of it. Not that it was a true wilderness, but so hunting for me has always been recreational, and I take something out of the hunt other than shooting the game. I've always taken something else out of it besides, shooting the game. But by the same token, learning to track a deer, any deer, and being successful at it the first time I was pretty exciting. So it's recreational. I love the woods. I love the big woods. But I don't have to go into those woods, and I don't have to take a deer every time I go into the woods. There's other things that I enjoy. Yeah.
There's something to be said about that.
Yeah. The first deer, or the first group of deer that I ever tracked successfully, and I actually shot one, it was a 6-pointer, was back in, my daughter Ellen was born in November the 18th, 1977. My wife had a difficult time with the birth. She had done an extended stay in the hospital, and so I didn't do a lot of hunting that year, but we got her home right on Thanksgiving Day, and we had a family gathering and such. Friday morning, I said to Becky, I said, yeah, how you feeling? Oh, she says, I'm fine. Baby was in the crib. Everybody was doing fine now. And I said, well, I'm going to go up. But we lived down in Moncton. I had 20 acres of land right on Fuller Mountain. And then behind me was just the mountain. And it was a pretty good chunk of woods. And there was deer there. So I said, well, I'm going to go hunting for a few hours. And he says, yeah. Well, as it happened, there was a fresh snow. And I remember leaving the backyard, walking up, and I got up on top, and it was all oak up there, and there was tracks in the snow of what I thought was around 3 or 4 deer. And I said, I'm going to follow these. Now, back then, myself, like all my buddies, were reading the exploits of Larry and Lanny Benoit. And I got to thinking, I said, well, they tracked these deer and they got them. I said, I got nothing better to do. I'm going to follow these deer for a while. And I did. And we weaved around back and forth, and they were doing all these different things that I didn't understand. And they came up over this little knob, and I had been up in there a dozen times squirrel hunting. And I said, well, I'm going to go easy. I remember poking my head up over, and I was looking, and there's 4 deer looking right at me. One of them was a buck. And just as soon as we made eye contact, they took off. But I was able to make a shot, and I got my deer. It was late in the season, and I spent more time in the hospital with my wife that year than anything, but late in the season, and I guess I somewhat tracked him. Now, tracking a buck to shoot him wasn't on my mind. I was following these deer, and I had other things on my mind. I was thinking about, this is what the Benoits do, and I said, I'm going to follow these. Well, it worked out. I tracked a half a dozen more after that, and I never even got close to them. But it started coming together for me. My good friend, Mike Condon, we went to high school together. I don't know if you know Mike or not, but he doesn't hunt anymore either. He's had some health issues, but he had called me back in the that same time frame, 76, 77, and he said, Bunham, and everybody calls me Bunham. He said, the Benoits are advertising to go hunting and hunting with them for a week. And he said, I'm going to pay the money and I'm going to go with them. Of course, Mike wasn't married yet, and he had all kinds of extra cash in his pocket. And, I had 3 kids and a mortgage, and buying back then an out-of-state license, I think, was around $45 or $50. Well, it might as well have been $4,500 because anyways, Mike told me, he says, I'm going to go. Well, he did. And he came back with stories, and they really piqued my interest. So he continued going with the Benoits for a few years. And then in 1979, I got a phone call from him one day. It was middle part of August. He says, hey, you want to go to Maine hunting? And I said, well, of course I do. I said, but first, the next thing I said was, how much is it going to cost me? Well, we worked it out, and so what had happened was Mike and his buddy Gary had kind of branched off on their own, and they rented a camp, and I chipped in. We all rented a camp together, and we stayed in a little town called Kingfield, Maine. And we were renting a camp, $10 a week per person. And there was no running water, but the fellow that owned it lived in town 5 or 7 miles away. He says, you want to come down and get a shower? He said, come on down when you feel like it. So we did. We took him up on it. And that was in 1979. And I hunted up there for a week or maybe 8 or 9 days to no avail. There was no snow, but I fell in love with the country. It was big. It was expansive. It was hardly any hunters. It was for me. It was for me. And I don't think Mike or Gary that year shot anything either. It was a pretty warm, dry year. 1980 rolls around, and I'm all ready to go back. We rented that same camp, and we went up. Sunday in Maine, you can't hunt. Well, we got in Gary's Jeep, and we went up, and Gary knew this place. It was up in what they called, it was above Lexington. It was up in what they called Highland Plantation. Now, geographically, you boys probably know where Flagstaff Lake is in the Stratton area.
Yep.
Well, the Highland Plantation was east of there. There was actually a dam over there. Well, on the other side of that, I don't remember the road number, but it was desolate. And Gary had told me, he said, Bunham, I was in here the year previous, and he found all kinds of big buck sign. And, of course, there was no snow back in that 79 year. It was a dry year for us all, but he had found it was up on Stewart Mountain. Now, boys, I'm going from memory here, so if I slip up, don't crucify me.
We won't hold it against you.
All right, so we drove up there Sunday afternoon, the three of us, and Gary's Jeep, we started smelling, we could smell motor oil, and all of a sudden his oil light comes on, so we pull over, and well, his Jeep, he had broken a motor mount, and the engine was torquing over into the side-mounted oil filter was rubbing on the frame water hole. Well, pumped all the oil out. Well, we were stranded. And I'm going to tell you, it was Sunday afternoon in the middle of nowhere. We finally caught a vehicle going by, and he stopped and gave Gary a ride back to town. We went back to the fellow's name we were renting off from was William Nemey, and he happened to be the road commissioner around Kingfield. I hope this is okay. Mm-hmm. So he had tools and everything, and he knew the local garage man, and so they went down to the garage and got another oil filter and some chain and everything. So they came back up, and I remember it was cold. Oh, my God, was it cold. Mike and I finally built a fire on the side of the road to warm up, waiting for those guys to come back. And they came back. We did roadside repairs. We chained the motor down to the frame, put a new oil filter in it, oil and everything, and we got back to camp that night. And we decided that the vehicle was good enough to use Monday morning. So Monday morning dawns, and Mike went to another area. There was Phil was with us then too. And they went to another area, and Gary and I drove up from Kingfield, zigzagged around and got on, I think they called it the Dam Road. We headed north up through Lexington and into Highland Plantation. And we're driving, and it was getting daylight, and there was nobody up there, guys. I mean, nobody. So I said to Gary, I said, are you sure it's hunting season? And there was nobody there. And so we got to our destination. You couldn't miss it. There was motor oil all over the road. So we pulled in. There was a heavy frost. Like I said, it had been very, very cold, down in the teens. And So Gary says to me, he says, well, Bonham, he said, are you gonna hunt all day, or what are you gonna do? I says, yep, I'm going to explore. I've never been there before, and I wanted to explore. Shooting a deer was the farthest thing from my mind that morning. We knew the woods were going to be loud and noisy, but I said, I'm going to go for a good walk. And so I did. I told Gary I'm going to be here all day. And Gary said, well, he said, I don't know if I'm going to stay here all day or not. I might just do a little scouting, see what's going on. I might I might go somewhere else. But he said, I'll be back before 3 o'clock. I'll be back before 3 o'clock. I said, okay, I'll be fine. So he went one way and I went the other. Well, I had zigzagged my way up an old skid trail, and it finally opened up, and right across the trail was this really large deer track. And fresh, I mean, it was, when you step on frost and how it compresses under you, that was just what it looked like. And I said, my God, that deer just walked through here. So I said, again, I'm going to follow it. So I did. Well, that was probably by 8 o'clock in the morning. I picked up his track, and I was maybe not more than a quarter of a mile from the Jeep. So I started following him, and the deer kept going to the northeast, kept going to the north and the east, the north and the east. And I was walking on the noisiest conditions you ever heard, but I didn't jump him. But a blind man could follow that track. I'm not kidding you. It was just a great big track, big long gait. I mean, I could only imagine how big is this deer. So it got to be about 10 o'clock, and the sun had come up and warmed everything, and the frost had melted off. And the leaves now were getting quiet. You could still follow that deer. I mean, I followed that deer. It was once in a while I would lose the track, but then I would just kind of walk around, look at where's the easiest place to walk, and then walk over, I'd pick his track right back up again. This went on till about just before noon, either just before noon or just after noon. And I was at the top of this bluff, and I remember looking across the canopy below me, and off in the distance I could see some ponds, and on my topographical map, I looked at it, they were the Carey Ponds, East and West Carey Pond. So I knew where I was, so I said, well, the deer had gone down into the bottom, and he had turned over leaves and rocks and everything. And I remember looking at my watch. I said, well, it's noon or so. It's going to take me a while. But I said, I'm going to follow this deer another hour or so. And I still hadn't jumped him. And I never heard him. I never seen him. And he never heard or seen me. Well, so I made the decision to stay with him. So I slid down behind where he was, where he had gone down. And I got to the bottom, and my wool pants had picked up leaves. I remember I was just brushing the leaves off my pants. Well, there's a deer. A doe. She took off running broadside to me. And, of course, my rifle light came up, and I just putting my rifle back down. Well, he came out right behind her. And I said, whoa. So he started running. Straight away from me. And I still hunted with peep sights then. I never actually went to a scope till about 15 years ago, but that's another story. Anyway, so he takes off. He's running straight away from me. And I had a little orange dot on the front of my rifle, and I put that little orange dot on all the white, and I let one go, boom, and I let another one go, boom. Third one went. And then he was out there, and I'm saying to myself, come on, go down. As I knew I can't possibly be missing him. And he got up, and he was probably about maybe 65, 60, 70 yards from me, and he turned to the side, and I can see the rack was sticking up, and he just stopped and kind of looked back my way, and I leaned against a tree, and I put the bead right on his rib cage, and he dropped right there. And he went down, and I remember his legs came up in the air and then back down again. I think the deer was dead before he hit the ground. So I cracked the action on my rifle, and I'm still cool. I mean, there's no adrenaline yet. And I said, yeah, I had a loaded round. I pulled the empty clip out of my rifle, left it right there on the ground, put another one in, and then I was looking at it, and all I could see from where I was standing, I could see the antlers sticking up off the ground and his white belly. So I said, well, I had to go out of sight of him to get to him, but I stepped down and I ran right up. I come out, and there he is laying there. He was definitely expired. And I looked at him. It was a 10. I started counting his points. My God, I said, it's a horse with a 10-point rack. That's what I thought. So the adrenaline started. I really started to get excited. I was really excited for myself. It was, I would consider that probably the first deer that I ever tracked and shot tracking.
And what'd that buck weigh?
257 pounds 3 days later.
No kidding.
Well, I shot him on Monday. We didn't get him to Ayode's store in Carabasset Valley till Wednesday noon. So what had happened, and I've got a bunch of pictures I'll show you later if you're interested. I said, well, I sat down. I remember unloading the chamber in my rifle, and I laid it down. I took my Fanta. I had a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. I'm sitting there, I'm eating it, and I'm going to say, boy, I said, wait till they see this back home, you know? And there was a million things going through my mind. So I said, well, I got to clean him. So I dressed him out, and then I went around. I whacked myself a good stout drag stick and hooked onto him with my drag rope. And I've got pictures of all this too. And I got on him to tug, and I said, this isn't going to work. And so the only thing I did, it had gone above freezing now, but it was still, the temperature was only in the 40s, and I was somewhat sweaty. I remember taking my jacket off, and I took my shirt off, and I put the shirt, I laid my shirt right across him, and I put my jacket back on, and I said, well, I got to get some help. So I'd like to tell you the rest of this. I'd like to talk to you about how we got him out of the woods.
Tell it.
So I started walking, and of course back then, so this was in November of 1980. So I started walking, and I walked back up the slide that I had come down, and when I got to the top of there, I took my knife and I just skanked the bark off of a tree. And I took a compass reading for where the Jeep is going to be when I get there, and I just started on a compass bearing, and about every 100 feet, I skanked another tree. And you know, like I say, no GPSs, and I've never been in these woods in my life. I want to find my way back to this deer. So I did that for, a couple, 200-300 yards, and then I said, we'll be able to find this trailblazing. I know we can. So I put my knife away, and I just started walking. So I walked for about 5 or 10 more minutes, and I hear somebody yell to me, Bunham, is that you? And it was Gary. I said, yeah. And then I saw him. Well, he had heard me shooting and didn't know what was going on, so he just started kind of hunting my way. Well, we crossed paths on my way back to the Jeep. So he says, well, what did you do? I said, Gary, I said, I got the biggest buck of my life laying dead. It's a big 10-pointer. And I said, it's going to take some doing to get it out of here. Oh, we'll get it out. We'll get it out. So we walked back to it, and we got on it. The two of us dragged it up that hill that afternoon, and we got it up at the top. And we looked at each other, and it was getting dark. And he said, we need some help. So we left it there. There was a little brook. Remember, we left it on a brook. And we walked out. And we got back to the Jeep. And we headed back down the dam road. We're just coming into Kingfield. Well, by now it's, I don't know, 7 o'clock at night, whatever time it was. And up the road's coming Mike and Gary, or Mike and Phil. And, yeah, what's going on? And Gary says, you ought to see the deer that Bunham's got down. It's, oh, you got one? I said, yeah, it's a good one. So we went back to camp. I remember calling my wife that night. So the next morning, so Tuesday morning, we went back in, 4 of us. We dragged on that deer all day. And I mean, it was tough going. By 2 o'clock that afternoon, we were wiped out. We decided, look, let's bury him one more night. We'll have him out here by noontime tomorrow. And that's what we did. So we went back Wednesday. We went in. We had a good night's sleep, all rested up. We finished. We got the deer down to the log road that we were parked on. And we winched Gary's Jeep in, and we got the deer in the back of his Jeep. And we headed for Carrabassett Valley. They hung it up. It was 257 pounds.
Wow.
And that was exciting for all of us, especially me. But that's the first deer that I can legitimately say that I tracked him. And
that lit a fire underneath you, obviously. You didn't
yeah,
stop there.
Yeah. There were others. Now, of interest, the following year, now remember, I still haven't tracked a deer on snow yet, okay, and killed them. The following year, we moved from that region because they were going to close. That was we were in the southern zone then, but the deer were starting. They were somewhat. They thought the herd was getting depleted, and they said, "Well, we're going to close the season a week early in this particular region where we were hunting in the southern zone," and they called it the western zone. It was basically Franklin County, and we decided, well, we didn't want to go back there and hunt for a week and then have to move and go somewhere else. So we decided we went up to the Moosehead Lake region. And we went to Rockwood, and we rented a camp, and the deer season came, and so here it is, it's opening day for us again, and Gary and I took off, and we've never been in this area in our life. Well, let's just go for a ride. We ended up on what they called the Boundary Road. And we're picking our way along, and he had a different Jeep, no broken motor mounts, and we're picking our way in along this Boundary Road, and it looked pretty deery. Well, all of a sudden we come out to a log header, and there was a couple of campers with some Vermont trucks parked around them, and there was nobody around, and it was drawing daylight, and I said, well, they must have they're all sleeping in. Well, we ended up, we drove past it, and it began to rain, and it began to rain harder, and the rain was coming down, so we got, about a half a mile past where those campers were, and I said to Gary, I wish I was in that camper right now, but I said, let me out. I'm going to go hunting. He says, you're crazy. He says, you aren't going to be out there 10 minutes. You're going to be soaked to the bone. I said, well, so be it. He let me out, and it was at the end of what we used to call the cul-de-sac. It was the bridge was out, and if you were daring enough, you could drive across it, but it was, for most part, people would get to there, and they would turn around and go back. So I told Gary, I said, look, I'm going to walk down this brook towards Long Pond, And I said, there's a lot of green down there. There was a lot of hemlock. I said, I'll get into there and maybe I'll poke around in there a little bit. So I did. So he left and he says, don't worry. He says, I won't be very far. I was okay. I walked down the brook and I wasn't 200 yards from where he let me out. Here's the biggest scrape in the world right there. And the deer had muddy feet. He was walking off through the leaves. Deja vu. It's opening day for me. 1 year later, I'm in a different spot, and here's the biggest buck track of your life right there in the wet leaves. So I'm going to follow it. So I did. I started following it. I kept going and I kept going. And I remember it was going back to the south. And we were between the Boundary Road and Long Pond. And there was enough real estate in there that if there were people in there, the deer could have gotten by them. But come to find out, the Merrills were all lined up in there. Dwayne and Kurt and David and Center. And also my buddy from Winooski, Carl Popolowski. I didn't know that at the time yet. So I'm following this deer, having the time of my life, and I'm going to say, I'm going to shoot a big buck this morning. Well, the shooting started up in front of me. And I said, maybe somebody else is going to shoot a big buck in here today. So I said, okay, I'm wet enough, and I think the jig is up, so I'm going to get out of here. So I turned and walked back to the road. And it took me a little while to get back up there because I got caught up in some blowdowns. I should have just backtracked myself. But anyways, by the time I got back up on the road, here comes Gary in the Jeep. And so I went around and I jumped in, and he says to me, he says, Bunham, you ought to see the buck they're dragging out of the woods down here by those trailers. Well, let's go down and look at it. Well, as we approach them, I did not know the Merrill family then, but I knew Carl Popolowski quite well. We grew up together. And I says, Gary, that's Carl Popolowski. So he says, Bunham, what are you doing up here? I said, well, it was the same thing you're doing. Well, there they had this great big buck, and I will shorten it up. I didn't get him, but somebody else did. But it was a 6-pointer. It dressed out at 276 pounds.
Wow.
So the moral of the story is, fellas, if you ever can pick up a track on dry ground and follow the deer easily, you better stick with it, because I guarantee you it's probably going to be the biggest buck of your life.
That's good advice.
Yeah.
Very good advice.
Yeah. Now, that was in 81. Now, in 1982, I got and he's around here someplace. I shot a 9-pointer up there, 206 pounds, and I shot him on snow. And the way that story went, again, I was with Gary again, my buddy Gary, and we were up between Dole Pond and Long Pond. And the Boundary Road went all the way through and came out by I don't know if you guys have ever been around there's a sugaring operation there now at Dole Pond. But on the lower road where you come out and you come across the dam, well, that road goes back and hooks into the old Boundary Road and goes all the way back to Rockwood. Anyways, we were out. We had been up there for almost 2 weeks, hunting dry ground. And I don't think I saw a deer in almost 2 weeks of hunting. I don't think I saw a deer. Out every day, hunting different spots, going around but again, like I said at the beginning of this, I was having fun because I was looking at country that was, it might have been that way in Vermont, 100 years ago, but boy, it was, up in Maine it was near and dear to me. So I was still having fun. Well, I remember Gary saying, well, he says, Friday, he says, the season opens in Vermont tomorrow. And I says, yeah, well, I said, I'm going to miss it. I'm not going home to hunt in Vermont. And we had plenty of time. By then, I had a job where I had ample vacation, and I was using it for hunting. So I remember coming across the boundary road, and then we hooked into that other road that comes out by Dole Pond, and we got to the dam, and we turned around, and I said, well, let's go back and go in along the Penobscot Lake Shinny Pond Road. Maybe we'll pick up something over there. So, yeah, all right. But there was a dusting of snow had fell on Thursday night into Friday. And we're driving back, and from the time we had gone to the end of the road and turned around and we were headed back, a deer had gone across the road. And it was we got out, we both looked at it, and Gary said, well, what do you want to do? And I said, well, I'd like to, I'll follow. Do you want to follow it? No, he said, if you want it, go ahead. So, I did. And I followed the deer. Now, again, we were we were away from Long Pond. There was room for the deer to go back to the west, but he was going to the east. Dole Pond was right there. So I followed him, and I never jumped him. And he was zigzagging back and forth. I could see where he was feeding. I said, now, I mean, my radar is on 110%, and I'm looking. And I'll be a son of a gun. There he was looking right at me. And I just came up and I shot him right there. And he fell. And so that was it was a 9-point, and he weighed 206 pounds, and I don't think I was an hour on his track. But the track was smoking because we had just come through there, and he maybe saw us drive by, across the road, and we... so that was a good, and it was, like I say, it was Friday before the season was going to open in Vermont. So I remember we got him out, and we loaded him. We had him down in Rockwood by, I don't know, noon, 1 o'clock, and hung him up back at camp. And I called home, and I said, yeah, I filled my tag. I got a nice deer, and was thankful for it. So that was the first deer I shot tracking on snow.
That's a pretty good buck. First one on snow.
Yeah.
Nothing wrong with that.
And he's up here someplace. Yeah.
That's when you go to the end of the road and you turn around, you come back, and he's come across.
You just know.
You just know. Yeah.
Yeah, you just know.
Yeah, that's pretty good indication of how far he actually is in front of you.
Yeah.
Yep. Take it when you can get them. They don't always come like that.
No, that was, that was somewhat of an easy one.
Yeah.
I've had some other easy ones. But I will say, if I've ever tracked a deer more than, except for the first deer that I killed tracking on dry ground, that one right there, the 257, I tracked him about 4 hours. If I ever had to track a deer longer than 3 hours, I never got him.
Just because you were so far behind him, you figured?
Probably, or I screwed up. God, I could tell you some other stories now are popping into my mind. There's right behind Brent's head there. It makes me think. And it's actually further down the... still again up in Maine, that one, there's a 6-pointer over there, Brent, in that picture with my buddy Scott. That was another hunt that happened. Scott had shot, over there, the next one, all the way down. Yeah. That's it right there. So the one on the left, that's the 6-pointer. He went 215. And, well, I'll tell you who was with me on that hunt. You know, he's almost a neighbor of yours. You know, Mike and Candy passed away now, but you know Mike DePaul?
No, I don't.
Okay, well, they live out on the lake. And I met Mike. We worked together at IBM, and he wanted to come to Maine, so I invited him to Maine. He came, and it was back in the days. This is back now. We're fast forwarding. I think that was around 1986, 87, something like that. And boy, now I'm thinking of other. So let's talk about that one. That's a tracking story.
Fire away.
So Scott had shot that nice buck. It dressed 190 or 195 pounds, and Scott was disappointed with it, and it didn't weigh 200. I said, Scott, I said, that's a beautiful buck, you know, and he had shot it up on Smart Mountain in Lowelltown. There's up there. There's Lowelltown and Skinner and Holub. It's up in the Western Mountain region, north of Stratton, going towards Coburn's Gore, but then go to the east from there. It was up in there, off the Goldbrook Road.
Off Goldbrook, yep.
You probably know Goldbrook.
Mm-hmm.
You know all those places. I'd hate to have to pay for all the gas that you use up. And, so Scott had that beautiful buck, and we had got him out. We went down to the store. We hung him up, and he was disappointed with the weight. And he had a good hunt, a beautiful buck, and he was disappointed. Well, we went to bed that night in my camper, and we got some snow. And we get up the next morning, so we started riding the roads, there was a lot of roads up there that you could ride on. We were riding the roads, looking for a track, and didn't really find anything. It got to be about 10 o'clock, and I said, well, let's go back to camp, get a coffee, hot chocolate, something, and we'll make a plan for the afternoon. We'll do something else. The deer weren't moving yet, okay? Now, I know you guys have seen that. You get a snowstorm, the deer don't move till 2 days later. Well, it was something like that. Well, we got back to camp, and we had something to eat, a cup of coffee, and we got the maps out, and I can't remember if it was Mike or Scott. Well, we haven't been over there. So I said, yeah, it's as good a place as any. So it was probably noon or so, 1 o'clock. We drove around, and we were driving in on there, and sure enough, there's about 200-pounder across the road and had gone right down through a clear cut. So if Mike DePaul hears this podcast, he'll laugh. But I said, okay, we're going to take this track. Mike was going to come with me. So we started following it. And it was going in and out. He was looking for does. And he was in and around all the blowdowns and everything through that clear cut. And I turned around and I said to Mike, I says, Mike, I'm almost positive I can get this deer. But I said, two of us were making too much noise. He's all bow out. He said, I won't go and all that. And I said, Mike, I don't want to, make you feel bad or anything, but I said, this deer isn't very far. That deer was checking out every little nook and cranny in that clear cut, and I knew he wasn't very far. So Mike said, no, I'll go back to the road or something, which he did. So I didn't stay on the track. I could look, and Moose Mountain was in view, and I knew there was a brook. And I said, that deer is, so I said, I'm just going to save myself some time. I cut right across the brook. I come out of the brook, and I'm looking, I'm taking a step. Sure enough, there he is standing right there. Boom, the hunt was over.
No good, yeah. Just like that.
Just like that. The boys came in, and they helped me drag it out, and it was a fairly easy drag as we had to bring them up through the clear cut. The Jeep was right up there, and that was a pretty good hunt. And again, that was I don't think the whole thing happened in about an hour or an hour and a half. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah.
That was 206, you said?
That deer was 215.
215.
215.
Mm.
Yeah. The 9-pointer that I got from the Boundary Road, between Boundary Road and Dole Palm, that one was 206. Yeah. It's foggy, but it's coming back to me.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that was another good hunt.
You're smiling.
Oh, I gotta tell you this story next. It's about Mike DePaul's son. We call you Tougher.
Oh, sure. I know Tougher.
Tougher DePaul.
Yeah.
You asked Tougher about this, and now we're going to talk about. So, the boys, Tougher and my son Justin, had gone to school together in Essex there, and they were up hunting, and I don't remember exactly the year, but it was still in the mid 80s, late 80s. It was still up in that same area. And by now we were staying in an Army squad tent with a wood stove, a barrel stove, and bunk beds. And it really was, boys, I'll tell you, it was a great experience. We all enjoyed it. And again, I got pictures of all of that. Well, I had shot a deer earlier on in the season, not a 200-pounder, but it was another I shot a lot of 6-pointers up there, which reminds me of a 229 6-pointer that I shot up there. But that's another story. You guys are getting me talking, it's jogging my memory here.
Perfect.
It's a good thing, Harold.
Yeah. I don't know who Harold is, but
Or Bonham.
anyways.
Bonham.
So anyways, I had shot a deer, and that's right. That was the year that Justin shot his very first buck, and we tracked that one together, and I'll tell that story after. But Justin had his buck, I had my buck. It was the last week of the season, and so Tougher says to me, he says, "Well, Mr. Torre, will you take me deer hunting?" And I says, "Well, yeah, if your dad and Mike Bonham, take him hunting, please." So we got up the next morning, and I said to Tougher, I says, "Tougher, I'm not bringing a rifle." And he says, "No, and he says, if we see something," he says, "I'm the one who wants to shoot it." And I said, "Well, you're going to." But I said, "I don't know what's going to happen." So off the Goldbrook Road, what's the other name? That road had two names. It was the Goldbrook Road and the something other road. But anyways, we drove down to about mile marker 6, Kibbe Range, okay? If you came in off from the highway and you went up through 3 or 4 miles, it was uphill, and when you finally come out up on top, I think it was at about between mile marker 4 and 5, it finally leveled out. And Kibbe Range was on the south side, and then Mount Pisgah was on the other side, and that ran right into Canada. And different ones were telling me, well, I remember, I don't know if you guys remember Terry Van Vechten or not, or, okay, they were telling me they had a camp down off from the highway down by Jim Pond. And they were telling me, we've been coming out of there at night once in a while, boy, we see bucks cross the road there from time to time. So I had that in the back of my mind. So we went down there. I says, "Tough," I says, "new area." I said, "I've never been in there before." I said, let's go in there. And there was snow. So the two of us went down, and then his dad and Kenny DeTilio said they went and they hunted up on the Kibbe Range that day. Kenny ended up shooting a bear that day. Yep. And so we parked, and there was a few tracks here and there, but nothing fresh, nothing big. But I said, Tough, let's just go do some exploring. So we did. Well, didn't we walk into a honey hole? Maybe a half a mile down into there. And, well, coming out of the honey hole was a beautiful buck track, and it was smoking fresh. So I said, just go easy. I said, I'm going to be right behind you. I said, I'm going to be using my eyes. You just keep, I said, look at the track. Just see where he's walking, and then but put your eyes out in front of you again. Take 3 or 4 steps. Look at the track. Keep looking, watching. I'm going to be doing the same. So this went on for about 15 or 20 minutes. All of a sudden, beyond the two of us, is the most picturesque thing I've ever seen in the woods. Drop-tine buck standing broadside to us. His left antler was silhouetted against his body, but it was bright. The right side was silhouetted against kind of like the sky, and I could see that point sticking down. Beautiful, beautiful buck. Standing there, froze. I said, Tough, there's your buck. I said, do you see him? And he's walking. I think so. I says, Tough, you got to shoot now. And by now I had raised my voice. The buck's still standing there. I said, Tough. I said, you've got to shoot. And you ask him this.
I will.
And he kept walking towards the deer. And then the deer takes off running, and he starts yelling, shoot, shoot. The whole thing happened, and the adrenaline was going through that kid so heavy, he scared the crap out of me. He sat down. His eyes were black as coal. His skin was as white as the snow on the ground, and he was trying to... I was just scared. I says, Tough, what's wrong? I thought the kid was dying. And he finally says, did you see that? I says, yeah, I did. And he says, can we go after him? I says, yeah. Or he says, we're going to go after him. But I said, this time, if we do see him again, I said, you're going to have to shoot. He says, I'll be all right this time. Well, we followed the deer to the west, down, and out of the snow. And that afternoon, we gave up on it. We couldn't follow him anymore. And the day ended, and Tougher was the talk of the town in the tent that night. Yeah.
He couldn't have been very old at that time.
14 maybe. Yeah, because I think he's a year younger than Justin, and Justin was 15. So Tougher, I think, was about 14. But that was, again, it's a tracking story that we didn't kill anything, but
Still a good time. Still a good hunt.
oh, and that kid will remember that the rest of his life.
Yeah.
And
Keeps us coming back for more.
the other one that I want to tell you about, it was that same year. It was earlier in the season, and Justin, my son, hadn't shot his first deer yet. And we were going out every day. And what we used to do, the week of Thanksgiving, Mike would take his kid out of school for the week. I'd take my kid out of school for the week. And Paul Rogers, another friend of ours, I don't know if you know him or not, but
I do.
he took his kid out of school for the week. And we all stayed in the camp together, and we would all go hunting in different. There was plenty of space up there to go hunting, and this one particular afternoon, we were up on Smart Mountain, between Smart Mountain and the Merrill Strip. And it's not big country now. It's all been, there's roads through there now, and God, they've got highway signs up almost. But anyways, it was really desolate back then, and Justin and I were up in there one afternoon, and Justin had the time of his life. He almost didn't have enough bullets with him. We jumped 3 different bucks that afternoon, and he shot at every one of them and never hit a one. And he was wondering if he was ever going to shoot a deer. Oh, anyways, it was that night we got back down to the tent, and Kenny DeTilio and Mike DePaul, Tuffer's father, and Paul Rogers. They were hunting between the end of Moose Mountain and the Moose River. And there was a pretty good piece of real estate in there. And they were saying, well, you know, we're in there, there's all kinds of deer sign in there, but there's nothing fresh. And I said, if there's that much deer sign, I said, there's got to be some deer in there, whether you're making it out to be fresh or old or whatever. I said, there's got to be some deer in there. Well, we went to bed that night, and the decision was made. Tomorrow morning, we'll take a few of us. We're going to line up between the river and the mountain, and we'll just walk through to the Caribou Road. It's 2 miles across. And I said, somebody's going to jump a deer in there. And so we did. So Justin was with me. Tuffer was with his father. Kenny was in there, and it was we all out, but we had 4, 2 people together and stuff, but 4 of us walking through, and it was noisy as hell. Crunch, crunch, crunch. I said, well, we're probably going to jump something, but we're never going to see it. But what happened, and we're just taking our time, and again, it got to be about 10 o'clock, and nobody had shot yet. We couldn't see each other. We were far enough apart, nobody could see each other. And my son and I had separated a little bit to try to maybe pick up some more sign. And he came down to me. He said, Dad, he said, I can see you walking, but I can't hear you now. I said, well, no. I said, yeah, it's quieted right down. And we kept going a little bit. Well, didn't we pick up a fresh track? And it wasn't any monster, but I followed it just a short distance, and I knew it was a buck. So I told Justin, I said, well, go ahead, and I said, I'm going to drop back, because I already had a deer. I had my rifle with me, and I shouldn't have, because they'll pinch you up there, and I probably shouldn't have, but I had it with me. But I said, you stay on the track. I'm going to be a little bit behind you, and I'm going to use my eyes, and you do the same. Well, we followed the track about another half an hour, and I'll be a son of a gun. There's the deer. And Justin spotted it the same time as I did, and he opened up on it right away. He got a bullet into it. The deer started to run up the hill. It turned around. It came running right back at us, and he finished it. And so that was his first buck. He finally had his first buck. He was 15. And the day before, like I said, I didn't know if we were going to have enough ammunition for the hunting trip. Yeah. So that was another good story.
Now, you've hunted a lot of Maine, right? You've hunted Allagash. You've hunted...
Yes. So we started in, me and Gary and Mike, we started there in Kingfield. We stayed at William Nemey's camp, and we hunted, the highlands in Lexington, and then around Flagstaff Lake. We moved to the Rockwood region, the following in 1981 because of the law change, and we hunted out of Rockwood for 5 or 6 years. I had some good hunts there, shot some nice deer, and then again it was getting crowded. I mean, there was a lot of there was a lot of logging going on. They kept punching in new roads. And remind me to tell you about the hunt with Scott Wiggett up there by Big Bog. And then we ended up leaving. I left the Rockwood area, and we went up Oxbow Way and Ashland, and then it eventually ended all the way up in the Allagash. And guess who I ran into up there? The Merrills. Yeah. Kurt Merrill had a camp up there right on the St. Johns River. He had a beautiful spot. He found the land and he bought it, built a camp. But I shot deer in the Allagash. I shot deer in the Oxbow. I shot deer all around the Moosehead Lake region. I shot deer in Franklin County in the Western Mountains. Yeah, so over the years, Maine has always been very near and dear to me.
Sounds like you covered a lot of its bases.
Yeah, I was in a lot better shape, Joey, back then. I could move. Yeah, I had 2 good legs and lungs, and of course, I tried. I never smoked or nothing. Neither did any of my buddies. They were all in good shape, and we just loved going up there, and we had plenty of room. But then, then you're tracking a buck, and next thing you know, he goes across the road, and somebody's on it ahead of you, and that spoiled it for me. And it was in 1992 I shot my last deer there, another 6-pointer, 192 pounds. Paul Rogers was with me, and that was the last year I hunted in Maine. I started going out to Western Ontario.
You were one of the first really to get out there.
It was in the early days, yeah. But now that was a completely different kind of hunting. So I had just spent the last 12, 15 years of my life learning and practicing the art of tracking deer. And that's what I really call it. When you track deer, you're practicing. You're never... I'm sorry, you're never going to know it all. There's the deer that just seems like they'll always do something different. The terrain changes their habits, but I had just spent, the last 10, 12 years of my life practicing the art of tracking deer and loving every minute of it. Well, got crowded out. And somebody had mentioned that Lester Senor had shot a big, you must know Lester.
Do. Yep.
Okay. Lester Senor had shot some gargantuan buck out in Ontario. Well, I know Lester. I knew Lester well, so I knew he wasn't going to tell me nothing. And I love the guy to death. Don't get me wrong. He was a great guy, good deer hunter. He mastered the art of still hunting. He wasn't necessarily a tracker, and I don't think he ever sat in a tree stand. But he just had an uncanny way for mingling in the woods and walking onto a buck. So I talked to them one day. He had come to town back when I had my gun shop on the River Road, and he stopped in with his Browning lever, BLR 257 Roberts, and I put a set of my scope mounts on it for him. And I said, Lester, how big was that buck that you shot in Ontario last year? And he says, well, he took a picture out. It was hanging in a meat locker. And it looked like a horse. And he says, we girthed it. When I first started hunting in Ontario, they're telling me about all these 300-pound deer. Well, there's not a scale out there. So I don't know where these guys were coming up with these weights. But Lester was girthing it with a cow girth, okay? And he says, we think it weighed 275 pounds. And I don't know that it did or that it didn't, but boy, I'll tell you almost needed 2 pictures to get it all in. And so I said, Lester, where'd you shoot him? I'm sworn to secrecy. I knew I was going to get an answer like that. I did it on purpose. Well, long story short, it didn't take long to figure it out. And my friend Charlie, it was in the winter. It was January 1993. It was a cold day. It was a Sunday afternoon. My buddy Charlie calls me up. He knew Lester. He says, "Hey," he says, "you ever consider about going to Ontario deer hunting?" I said, "Well, as a matter of fact, I got some maps on the table right now. I'm studying them right now." He says, "I'll be right over." So we made plans that winter to go to Ontario. And the reason I'm telling you this is because we'll back up again. Like I said, the first part of my deer hunting career, I spent mostly tracking deer in Maine where you could track them. Well, now we go out to this Western Ontario, Lake of the Woods region, and back then there were a lot of deer there, and there were a lot of big deer there, but there was no snow. It was rare to see a snowflake out there in November. And by November 15th, we had to be out of there because the season closed. Well, I went hunting, and I don't know, Joey, if you've been there yet or not, but I know Brent's been out there. It's different terrain. It's thick, it's green, it's rocky, it's ledgy. But the deer use the same trails habitually. And I mean, it was easy to find deer sign, but I'm on the ground walking around, jumping deer, and so the first year that I was out there, I never even shot anything. And it was Charlie Boyer. He says, "We got to bring tree stands." He says, "We got to hunt. We got to get up in the air." So the next year we went out, and I didn't own a tree stand, and I didn't bring a tree stand, but he did, and geez, he started seeing some deer, and he shot a deer. He shot a nice one too. It was a nice big. I think it was 240 pounds. It was a nice big buck. So I'm saying, maybe I got to buy a tree stand. Well, enter the art of scrape hunting. Now, I'd heard of scrapes, I'd seen scrapes, but I never sat and hunted over one, even though that story I want to tell you about my buddy Scott. Are we running out of time yet?
We can always do two.
Okay. I had never hunted on a scrape. And to me, all scrapes were the same. Well, I did some scouting my third year out there, and I brought a stand with me my third year out there because I'd been out there the first 2 years. I'd never shot anything. Went out there the third year. I did some scouting, and I came into an area where that was just tore up. I mean, it was. I had, the only other time I had seen something like that was a story I want to tell you about up in Maine when I was with Scott Wiggett. This area out in Ontario was so ripped up and torn up. You took your rifle off from the deer got me surrounded. That's the first thing that I thought. And I finally hung a stand there. And I went in the next morning, and I sat in the stand, and at 8:45, I shot that 10-pointer right there, 245 pounds. The next day, my buddy Charlie went into that same stand, and he shot an 11-pointer. We shot 3 bucks out of that stand in 3 days, and they're all big bucks. So now I'm beginning to learn how to become a scrape hunter. And I started reading everything about it that I could, but I practiced. Every year that we went out there, of course, there wasn't anybody out there hunting yet. And I learned a lot about scrape hunting and how to identify a scrape that is being used year after year after year. But to this day, I have never found anything. That spot finally fizzled out. It finally fizzled out. I shot. There's another deer on the other side. I can see his antlers from here underneath the fox. Doug Edwards came out there with me. Well, that was the last year I hunted in there, and I shot a 10-pointer. And that was the last deer that I shot in there, but the hunting had really gone downhill. And again, it was being overhunted again. Everybody was out there, and so we moved out of there, and that was when we went to the Alano Peninsula, and that might have to be for another day.
Might have to be.
What do you think, Joey?
I think we should. We're an hour and 10 into this. Maybe we call it an episode.
Okay.
Let's take a little break, and we'll do another one.
All right.
All right. Until next time, guys.